So here's why you should vote for Trump. Even if you're a liberal, even if you hate Trump, even if you believe that socialism or communism or some variation thereof is a better form of government than capitalism, you should still vote for Trump. Even if you think he is a womanizing, racist billionaire asshole, this billionaire oligarch that is participating in corrupt capitalism, even if you believe that, you should still vote for him. Okay? The reason is because there's a war going on right now between the cabal, the deep state, and the free peoples of Earth, the people that want to be free under some kind of non-corrupt system, whatever that system may be, capitalist, socialist, communist. It's just like Lord of the Rings, honestly, at this point. Nobody wants the kind of world that the deep state is intending. Nobody wants more pandemics. So nobody wants a world ruled by this criminal cartel. So the world is ruled by these criminal elite scumbags, by these psychopaths. And you can trace their ancestry back to ancient Rome, actually. So a couple thousand years ago. You can trace their ancestry back to the Roman Senate before the first Caesar. So they have ruled the world in part or full since then. So I'm talking about the royal bloodlines, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Astors, the Browns in California, the Windsors in the UK, and all of these royals. They've changed their names many, many times over the years, over the centuries. So their original names, which they only use in private in their inner circle, really only they know. So after Rome fell, they realized that they could not rule openly because somebody would always come to knock them off the throne. So they started to form what I would call second and third class royal families, probably of the same bloodline, distant cousins, and so on. And so these second and third class royals were the kings and queens, the emperors and the empresses. They were the puppet rulers that were propped up by the real power behind the throne. Okay? And they ruled this way until the last kingdom and empire fell. And they learned that any monarchy or empire is not going to last forever. So, as soon as they got a puppet ruler in power, they would immediately start backing an opposing faction to take down the puppet ruler that they had just put up. And you might say, well, why would they want to do that? That's crazy. Well, that's how you control your opposition, because there is going to be an opposing faction to any ruler that is an elite psychopathic scumbag. So you may as well start funding and supporting the opposing faction right at the very beginning so that you can infiltrate and corrupt it to your liking. And so that's exactly how the elites have been ruling the world for thousands of years. And they probably predate the Roman Empire, but the paper trail is lost before Rome, and so there's no real proof of that. But it probably, in all honesty, dates back to the Sumerians back in 3500 BC. And so when the kingdoms and empires of old fell and new forms of government that were not monarchies or empires took their place, the elites showed up as bankers and said, hey, we support your revolution. We didn't like that wicked old king or queen, that bad old emperor. And so we'd like to loan you some money so you can pay your armies. And we'll give you a great interest rate because we support your cause. And so the royals didn't really fall. They just went underground and became the bankers. So this whole thing has been a subversion. It's been a deceit. It's been a trick. So the same royal families still rule the world today. They just are posing as these international bankers that own everything. They own all of the central banks, all of the pharmaceutical companies, all of the insurance companies. They fund and control both parties in the U.S., the Republicans and Democrats. They fund and control every major political party in any country in the world, pretty much. They control communist China. They controlled the USSR. They set up the Bolshevik Revolution that led to the USSR. They set up the revolution that led to communist China. They set up the corruption of imperialist China that then led to the justification for the Chinese Communist Revolution. They set up World War I. They played both sides. They set up World War II. They played both sides. They supported the Zionist bankers that ruined the German economy and made Hitler popular, because he could then blame the ruined economy on the Jewish bankers, and he could get the Germans to hate the Jews. They supported Hitler, secretly funding him through the Vatican, through the Thule Society, which is an occult society in Germany. So they supported both sides. And the elite Zionist bankers sacrificed regular Jewish people to then have justification to set up Israel. They manipulated the Vietnam War, the Korean conflict, Desert Storm 1 and 2. They manipulated all of that. They perpetrated 9/11. So this is who is ruling the world. This is who these people are, okay? And they've been running the world for a long time. And how they've been able to hold themselves together as an organization through the centuries, through the generations, through so many generations of human beings, one after another, after another, after another, after another. They operate on a very long-term view. They do not expect to achieve their goals, their ambitions in their lifetime. So they're always looking to the future and passing the torch to the next generation of elites. And this goes contrary to basic human psychology, because a basic human being wants to see their dreams manifest within their lifetime, usually within like 10 years or less. So how they've been able to hold themselves together as an organization for this long is still an unanswered question. There is a lot of archaeological evidence of ancient aliens. And the occult groups that have formed around these royal families do seem to have advanced technology. And they have had it for a long time, dating back to even the Egyptian Empire, actually. So that might be part of the puzzle here. And every single one of these royals, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Oppenheimers, etc., etc., Every single one of these royals, they hate Trump. They fucking hate him. And so if you also are hating Trump because of the news that you've heard about him in the last 4 years, then you basically are siding with the elites. You're siding with the royals who also hate him. These royals own the media companies. They completely control the narrative, okay? The media is basically just the propaganda arm of the cabal. And I've researched a lot of anti-Trump articles, especially back in 2017, after I voted for him and he got sworn in, and there was so much hatred of the guy. I started to think, wow, maybe I've made a mistake here. Maybe he is really Orange Hitler, and I'm just way off in my judgment here. I didn't come around to support him until October of 2016, like a month before the election, because I thought that he was another billionaire scumbag, honestly. I had no interest in him at first. None. I've been researching this kind of stuff for 20 years, and it's all a deception. It's all a trick. It's all a trap. The Clintons are as dirty as the Bushes, the Romneys, the McCains, the Pelosi's, the Browns. You know, very few presidents have actually been non-deep state, non-cabal presidents. Very few presidents have been clean. Both parties in Congress have been pretty dirty over the years. So for this orange billionaire asshole from New York to show up, and he's the one who's going to be the clean guy and save us, it's like, give me a break. What a likely story. That sounds like a line of bullshit if I've ever heard one. However, evidence is evidence and facts are facts. And after watching Trump and researching him for the last 4 years, he is genuine. And it's important to understand that he is just the figurehead, okay? So this election is not about Trump. This election is about the U.S. military versus the royals, versus the cabal, okay? So let's go back to JFK, who was elected president in 1960. There seems to be two factions within the royals. One which is a faction of the light and the other which is a faction of the dark. And I'm not going to get into all of that conspiracy theory relating to that. And there are many, many manipulations on both sides as they try to sway politicians and celebrities and other people of note and influence. Anyone who has a voice that the public listens to, basically. They try to sway these influential people to one side or the other. And I'm not going to say that the light side of the royals is completely good. I don't really think that they are, but I think they do want to remain elite, but also they want a positive future for humanity. And they don't want to control us completely. They want humanity to choose their own destiny. And they also are open to people kind of earning the right to join them. To become part of their group if that person educates themselves to a very high level and proves their worth, and kind of raises themselves out of just being a commoner, just a regular person, and becomes kind of an enlightened thinker and philosopher. Then I think they're open to having their ranks, filled out by these kind of folks. So they're not completely closed off 100% elites like the dark side of the royals are, okay? And that's all I'm going to say about them. I don't want to get into further conspiracy theory. So JFK, I believe, was part of the good side, and he definitely was a womanizer. Though he slept around too much, he cheated on Jacqueline too much. He slept with Marilyn Monroe, and he disclosed some things to her about UFOs and so on that she decided to speak openly about, and that got her killed. So he was definitely not a perfect man, JFK, and kind of similar to Trump, actually. Trump is a womanizer. He's slept with way too many women, I imagine. He's cheated on all of his wives, except for maybe Melania. He married Melania in 2005, and it seems to me like he cleaned up his act around that time. He, I believe, started to date Melania somewhere around 2000 or 99. I forget the year exactly, but after JFK Jr. died in 1999, he seemed to kind of clean up his act and his womanizing and his cheating and sleeping around. JFK Jr. and Trump were best friends in the 90s, to those of you that didn't know. Okay, so back to JFK. He was elected in 1960, and in 1961, he founded the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is under the Pentagon, Department of Defense. It's basically military intelligence. So he founded the DIA to replace the CIA because he discovered that the CIA was deep state and they were working against the best interests of America. There's a movie called 3 Days of the Condor starring Robert Redford back in the 70s. Robert Redford was young and really super good looking back then. Even though he's still pretty good looking now, but he's getting old. And so his character is a CIA analyst. And he discovers something that he was not supposed to see. And these assassins show up and try to kill him. And they kill everybody in his office where he works except for him, and he escapes. And the remainder of the movie is basically a giant chase scene where they're trying to kill Robert Redford's character, and he ends up finding out what is going on and why they're trying to kill him. And then at the end, he exposes the corruption of the CIA to the media. And supposedly that is going to save his life, and that's how the movie ends. Although these days the media is completely controlled by the deep state, so you can reveal to the media anything you want to, and it just doesn't make any difference. They cover it up anyway. But Robert Redford's character in the movie says a line that is very, very true today and was very true back then when JFK was elected president in 1960. He says there's a secret CIA within the public CIA. And this secret CIA is criminal. They engage in assassination and espionage and all kinds of nefarious stuff. They are absolutely cabal, deep state, gun running, sex trafficking, drug dealing. They are absolutely evil. This secret, deep state part of the CIA. And of course, this includes MI6, it includes Israeli Mossad, it includes all kinds of government agencies around the world. And so this is the deep state. They're an international cabal that is funded and controlled by the royal families. And so JFK was trying to get rid of these people and get them out of the U.S. government. And so he founded the DIA, which is military intelligence, to investigate all of this and to start, operations within the U.S. military to expunge the deep state from the United States. And so the CIA hired Cuban gangsters and had a Secret Service agent on the inside, and they assassinated JFK in 1963, 2 years later. The Cuban gangsters shot him with rifles from afar. They had some pretty good snipers on their side, and the Secret Service agent shot JFK from underneath his suit from the front of the car. I believe that was the shot that hit JFK in the neck. And then the shot that everybody saw, that was a rifle round that hit him in the head, that was from a Cuban gangster. And the Cuban gangsters didn't get caught because they had a patsy, which was Harvey Oswald. And Harvey was very quickly killed by Jack Ruby to cover it up. And so the Cuban gangsters never got caught. But if they had got caught, then they would have blamed the assassination on Russia, on the USSR. So that was the play. And they ended up not needing to do that. But that was basically the play. That was the cover-up. And there was a lot of tension back then between the U.S. and the USSR over Cuba. And nuclear war almost happened a couple of times between the U.S. and the USSR over Cuba back then. Okay, so after JFK was killed, the DIA barely survived, in my opinion. They only survived because of some very loyal U.S. generals who kept them alive. And so even though their commander-in-chief, JFK, had been killed, the DIA didn't give up. They kept fighting the good fight, and they've been involved in a covert war with the CIA since that time. So fast forward to the 90s. Trump and JFK Jr. were best friends. And they didn't really publicize that friendship. They kept it on the down low. And JFK Jr., in the last years of his life, ran a magazine called George Magazine, which is kind of like a political insider or inside scoop on the Washington Beltway type of magazine. And so he exposed in a tongue-in-cheek kind of way all the corruption of the Clintons and the Bushes and the deep state, and did his best to disseminate that information, to spread that knowledge. And so you know that Trump and JFK were talking about this all the time. And Trump did try to run for president as an independent. He tried to seek the nomination for the Reform Party for the 2000 presidential election against Al Gore and George W. Bush. And he couldn't get enough support and dropped out of the race in February 2000, I believe. He speculated about running against Obama in 2012, but then dropped out. And then he finally was able to run in 2016, of course. So Trump is not really a conservative. I would say he's more of a centrist, honestly. I'm a centrist and probably leaning slightly left because I'm an environmentalist. And I'm totally against fracking and fossil fuel usage, which we don't need to use anyway because we have free energy technologies that have been covered up for decades. And so Trump is using fracking and the expansion of that activity to temporarily prop up the U.S. economy because the deep state has been trying to ruin the U.S. economically for decades already. So I'm hoping that the fracking and fossil fuel usage will be phased out and new energy technologies will come to the fore in the next decade. There is some supporting evidence that this is happening, although I'm not going to get into it right now. But there's a cold fusion device that was published recently as a prototype. And there's zero-point energy devices, and there's over-unity devices, and so believe it or not, Trump and the DIA are going to try to slowly bring out these hidden technologies in the next 4 years. And although free or alternative energy devices have actually been around at least since Nikola Tesla's time, and honestly, there's quite a bit of evidence that the occult secret societies have had this kind of tech for hundreds of years and have kept it to themselves. So there's already been the potential for cars to run on water, for over-unity devices to be used, for zero-point energy devices to be used and developed. But every time these inventions came out, the inventors would be killed. And there's been 70 plus free or alternative energy inventors that have been assassinated or have died under mysterious circumstances since Nikola Tesla's time, which was in the 20s, basically, in the 1920s. And so since Trump got elected, these assassinations have stopped, basically. And so now inventors and companies are slowly starting to roll with developing prototypes. And the cold fusion prototype that I saw and read about the other day is just the beginning. And there's going to be much more coming after that. So even though the environmental future under Trump looks bleak because of the temporary expansion of fracking to offset the deep state's takedown of the U.S. economy, the long-term energy future actually is very bright, and we're going to have anti-grav tech and free energy, I would say definitely within the next 10 years, unless the deep state wins. And then we're not going to have anything but tyranny and death. So the free and alternative energy future is looking pretty darn good at this point, and there's a lot of new stuff that's going to be coming forth pretty quickly, I think. Although the primary objective is the war against the deep state. We have to get rid of the deep state first before anything else can happen, before anything else can proceed. Otherwise, they're just fighting a losing battle. So the free energy tech may not actually come out until the president after Trump, assuming that Trump and the U.S. military are able to win against the deep state, which is not guaranteed. So anyway, back to JFK Jr., there is a conspiracy theory that he staged his own death in 1999 when he died in a plane crash, supposedly, and that he's still alive, and that he and Trump have been secretly working behind the scenes against the deep state. Honestly, I find this to be pretty far-fetched, but the people in the QAnon movement talk about JFK Jr. so much that at this point I'm wondering, if there might be some truth to this. I will briefly say that JFK Jr. was very heavily protected by the DIA, his father's agency. And the DIA was unable to protect JFK. And so if they also are unable to protect JFK Jr., the son of their founder, then that would be a major blow to them and a major failure on their part. So it's possible that he is still alive because he was very heavily protected, and he may have decided to use an assassination attempt against him to fake his own death. So that's the conspiracy theory, true or not. JFK's body was found However, the pictures of his body are fake. The pictures of his body are of a Navy test dummy that is used by divers to practice rescues. Their bodies were very quickly taken to the medical examiner 3 days. Sorry, they were taken to the medical examiner on the same day that they were found, and then they were also very quickly cremated on the same day, all on the same day. So the bodies were found, examined by the medical examiner, and then cremated all on the same day, which was just July 21st, 99. Then their ashes were scattered the next day, July 22nd, at sea from a Navy vessel. And then a small memorial service was held the day after that. So the whole thing was kind of fishy and happened extremely quickly, and really very few people actually saw the bodies, which is strange for this kind of public figure. Also, somebody planted a buoy with a transponder that matched the location ID for JFK's plane. And they planted it a little bit away from the crash site. So it took the divers like an extra several hours to find the plane. So somebody planted that buoy to buy time, to do something. So this doesn't mean that he's alive. It just means that there were some shenanigans around that plane crash that supposedly killed him. So theoretically, I guess he could still be alive. The more that people keep talking about it, and the more kind of weird anomalies and suspicious happenings that show up, that people talk about around his death, the more that I start to think that, well, maybe he is really alive, you know. So let's go to 9/11, 2001. So 9/11 happens, and the towers are demolished with thousands of people inside. And it was a controlled demolition. This has been proven. And if you don't believe me, you can look it up. Physics Magazine, I believe, is one of the publications that has published this finding. There's a group called Architects and Structural Engineers for 9/11 Truth. I think they currently have 3,000 members, and they have done all of the structural analysis, all of the mathematics, all of the engineering calculations. They've done extensive analysis of the blueprints of the towers, and they've determined in their professional opinion that these towers came down from a controlled demolition that was done with nanothermite, which is a military-only explosive, or at least government-only. And so they analyzed concrete debris samples from the towers, and they did find nanothermite in the concrete debris. They found unexploded nanothermite particles, and they found the unique chemical signature of exploded nanothermite, proving that nanothermite did detonate that day when the towers came down. And so in order for this kind of thing to happen, there would have had to have been a construction project where concrete was being poured around the central support columns of the towers. Pretty much on every floor. And some of those floors had very high security clearances. And so sure enough, there was an elevator retrofit project to redo the elevator shafts in the 2 years prior to 9/11, and they did pour concrete on every floor around the central support columns. And the work was done by an Israeli construction company with ties to Israeli Mossad, which is Israel's CIA, basically. And I'm not anti-Semitic at all. Any comments about Zionists or Jewish people, I'm only talking about the Jewish elite, which have nothing to do whatsoever with the regular Jewish people. They don't know anything about what the elites are doing for the most part. And the elite Zionists use the regular Jewish people as a cover, as a scapegoat. And anytime that anybody criticizes their activities, they cry anti-Semitism. So it's a very good strategy to escape blame. And so some of the royal families identify as Jewish, even though they're not really Jewish, they're fake Jews. And other royal families identify as other ethnic groups or races. But essentially it's all a cover, okay? They infiltrate and manipulate and lie and deceive until their objectives are met. Okay, so 9/11 obviously was an inside job, or at least the U.S. government was complicit in it. And so imagine that you are a general in the U.S. Armed Forces or a Navy admiral, and 9/11 happens. And your primary duty as a military officer is to defend the homeland, to defend America. And so then 9/11 happens and thousands of people die. And you ask NORAD, what the fuck were you guys doing? Where were the F-16s? Why didn't they intercept the planes? And the guys at NORAD go, sir, but we were doing an exercise that day of planes hitting towers, hitting skyscrapers, sir, and sir, nobody here knew whether it was real or it was just part of the exercise, sir. Duh. I mean, can you imagine the nuclear fucking meltdown of the generals and the admirals to this kind of bullshit answer as to why the defense systems of the U.S. failed that day and thousands of people died? I mean, these military guys are not paid to be politically correct, okay? They will eat your fucking ass if you give them that kind of bullshit response. And so in the years following 9/11, the DIA, of course, did their own investigation and found that the 9/11 Commission report was complete bullshit. Found that the only way that this kind of coincidence can happen where NORAD is having an exercise about planes hitting towers the same day that 9/11 happens, the only way that that kind of coincidence could happen is if there's traitors inside the military and inside of the civilian side of the government as well. The whole thing was a complete setup. So remember that it's the military's duty, their primary duty, to protect America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So after 9/11, in a nutshell, the DIA and the generals discovered that the civilian side of the government had become an enemy to the people of America. And the DIA had already known that for a long time, but they were not able to convince, apparently, the majority of the generals and admirals, the 4-star guys at the top. They were not able to convince the majority of those guys before 9/11 that this actually was the case. They did not have a huge event, a huge attack event to point to say, here, look, see, all these Americans died. This was caused by the deep state. The deep state has infiltrated our government, and the civilian government is now an enemy of the people of the country. But when 9/11 happened, all that changed. And so they decided that they needed to do a military coup d'etat, because the civilian side of the government was an enemy of the people at this point. So they were not ready to do a coup d'etat under George W. Bush. They were still investigating. The Patriot Act was passed, and this allowed the NSA, National Security Agency, which is organized under the Pentagon, Department of Defense. So the Patriot Act allowed the NSA to surveil anything and everything. And so the DIA started looking into the corruption on the civilian side of government, which they had been doing already for years, but now they had much more intel to work with, much more signals intelligence to work with, and their budget was tripled after 9/11. So that should tell you something. So the generals finally got fully behind the DIA, and they went to work figuring out what the hell happened on 9/11. What caused this massive failure of the defense systems of the U.S. So then the deep state made a master move, which delayed the coup for 8 years. They got Obama, the black guy, to be president. And I voted for Obama both times because I was hoping he would be better than Romney or McCain. But unfortunately, he just ended up to be a puppet. And I'm not part of the Obama is the Antichrist conservative faction. I think that's really ridiculous. He's just a puppet. They probably blackmailed him, or he might have actually been manipulated as a deep state asset for decades already. That's probably more likely. But you've got to wonder, how was Hillary able to cheat Bernie Sanders out of the Democratic nomination in 2016, and she didn't do the same to Obama in 2008? Because Bernie was the heavy favorite, and she cheated him out of that nomination in 2016. Why didn't she do that against Obama in 2008? It's because they needed the black guy in the presidency. Can you imagine Obama getting elected as the first black president, and you have African American hearts just swelling and filling with pride and hope and joy at this momentous event in U.S. history? And all the people like me that voted for him and were just hoping that he's not a corrupt candidate like Hillary or Bill or Bush or Romney or McCain or any of these scumbags. And then when the first black president gets into office, then the military does a coup d'etat in the first year or two of his presidency. Can you imagine the race card that the media would have played at that point? Whew. Ooh, that would have been bad. The media would have put out the war cry. They would have started beating the drums of war and telling the American public, oh my God, the KKK has infiltrated the military. All these old white men that are the generals, they're all racists that hate black people, and they're going to take down Obama and his administration and do a coup d'etat because they're racist. Can you imagine the civil unrest that that would have caused? And the media might have been able to convince some of the armed patriots in this country, some of the millions and millions of gun owners in this country, to take up arms against their own government and fight them, in the streets and in the military bases. I don't know how far they would have pushed it. They probably wouldn't have pushed it that far, but there would have been massive civil unrest if that had happened under Obama. There would have been just thousands of deaths in the streets. And the riots this year by BLM and Antifa would have looked like child's play in a candy store compared to what would have happened under Obama if the military had done a coup. And so the deep state used Obama as the black guy and the race card to delay the coup d'etat by 8 years. And it was a brilliant move on their part. And they firmed up their assets and they worked on their bioweapons. COVID-19 is obviously a bioweapon. And, they prepared for the final battle, which is taking place now. Okay? And so after this master move, this master chess move by the deep state of getting Obama in, the generals decided to try to not do a coup d'etat, but instead to ask a person to run for president to see if, by any chance, he or she could win. To get somebody in the presidency as the military commander-in-chief that is not a deep state president. And for whatever reason, they chose Trump. They asked him to run. This is the truth, okay? He was best friends with JFK Jr. He knew all about the corruption. There's been whispers of him running for president for decades. And there's a reason for that, and I'm not going to go into all the conspiracy theory stuff surrounding this, but in the years that follow, I hope a lot of this kind of stuff will come out, and the details of what's been going on and why Trump ran and why they asked him to run. So Trump's presidency is a legal military coup to do it the legal way under the rule of law, under the Constitution, so we can avoid massive civil unrest. And the deep state is throwing everything they can at Trump. There have been more natural disasters and fires and hurricanes and earthquakes under Trump than under, I think, the last 6 to 8 administrations combined. And they do have these kinds of advanced technologies that can cause or accelerate these kinds of events. Okay, they do have that tech. They have thrown everything at Trump that they can throw at him. They've tried to assassinate him over 20 times. It's not reported, the media ignores it, and military intelligence doesn't report it anyway. The war that is going on behind the scenes is just unbelievable. And the one thing that is keeping it from spilling out into the streets and causing thousands of people to die and be targeted openly by the deep state is that the deep state has to remain hidden. They have to remain a secret organization that rules from the shadows. They cannot control directly billions of people. They've tried to do it in the past. It does not work. The human spirit and will always overcomes the darkness as soon as we become aware of it and we unify and we stop fighting with each other and calling each other stupid names and we stop being baited by fake news. As soon as we unify and fight openly, directly, and we become willing to sacrifice our lives if necessary against the darkness, then at that point the darkness always loses. And it's always been that way throughout human history. The only way that the deep state can win is if they keep us in the dark, if they rule from the shadows, if people don't know what's going on. So of course BLM, which is a Marxist organization funded by Soros and the Clinton Foundation and maybe the McCain Foundation as well, and all kinds of dirty money, you know. They have to use the race card. They have to use black people as the reason why they're doing these massive protests and pushing their agenda. They don't care about black people. It's not about helping black people, okay? There's been some really hilarious videos posted by black people who are at BLM rallies and they're listening to the messages of the BLM speakers there and they're looking at the camera and they're like, what? This is not about helping black people. This is communism, man. This is Marxism. What the fuck are these people talking about, you know? And they're kind of like, I'm at the wrong rally. This is not our movement. You know, this is not us. And they kind of back away like, what the fuck is this shit, you know? And these Antifa guys are funded by Soros. And basically what they're doing is they're going around and getting a lot of the homeless, which are addicted to meth and heroin, especially the meth addicts. The heroin addicts are just too sleepy. You know, they got to get the meth guys. And they're going around and recruiting these guys and paying them in cash and drugs and getting them all hyped up to go and set all these wildfires and burn down buildings and all this crazy stuff. And they're being paid to do it. Soros and Bloomberg, I think, are funding most of that Antifa stuff. And Antifa is actually using the same flag that was used by the Nazi brown shirts. And the Nazi brown shirts were the group that went around and harassed Jews in Germany and other Germans that did not support Hitler. And they beat them up and they burned down their businesses and they chased them out into the street and broke their windows and smashed in their doors and stole all their stuff and looted and rioted and burned. Exactly the same thing as Antifa is doing. Same flag and same message. Anti-fascism. That was the message that the Nazi brown shirts used on their flag. Anti-fascism, even though they were fascists themselves. And so blaming your enemy of what you yourself are doing is a very basic Marxist tactic. It confuses the opposition. Okay. So anyway, all these riots and Marxist groups, and as well as the pandemic, which was a bioweapon, and the natural disasters, and all the crazy stuff that's been going on, this is all the deep state's war against the DIA, which asked Trump to run. And so it is the U.S. military versus the deep state. And we're seeing this battle for control of the world play out right in front of our eyes. Okay? So this election is not about Trump. It is about the battle between the U.S. military and its allies around the world in other countries and the cabal, the deep state. And if Trump loses, which doesn't seem like it's going to happen unless voting fraud swings it to Biden, but if Trump loses and Biden wins, then the military will do a coup d'etat in the open next year. Biden and Harris and Obama and Podesta and Hooman Aberdeen and Hillary Clinton will all be indicted for very serious crimes. And then the president at that point might be the Speaker of the House. And so if the Republicans take back the House this election, then the military might be able to avoid doing a public coup d'etat, and they might actually do something like declare a new election next fall or fall of 2022 or something. I don't know all of the laws around this kind of issue and if they would do another election or not, or if the Speaker of the House would remain president for the remaining term. Not sure on that. I'm sure a lot of you out there know better than me on that. But if the next president is not Trump, and if the next president is a deep state asset, then the military will have to do a coup. And then at that point, the battle goes to the next level, because the media and the other deep state assets can then use that coup d'etat to call for revolution against the government. And that's when things could get really, really messy. So even if you hate Trump and you think he is the enemy, what I'm telling you here is the truth, as far as I have been able to find out and research. In the last 20 years, I've been looking into this stuff. This is the actual truth about who Trump is as president and why he ran, okay? And the media has been lying to you for 4 years about this man. He does not want to outlaw abortion. He does not want to take away women's rights. He is not racist. He does not hate Muslims or Mexicans. He does not want to stop immigration. He's not against immigrants. He is not particularly pro-fossil fuel, except he's temporarily using that to bolster the economy that the deep state has been trying to destroy. But we're not going to need fossil fuels for very much longer, unless I'm completely wrong about Trump and everything else. And if I am, then we're totally screwed, because then both sides are evil, you know. But I don't think that I'm wrong, and so I have a lot of hope that Trump is good and he is on the side of the light, and that the U.S. military has a pretty good chance of winning this battle. And if we become aware of this and we support with our consciousness, with our energy, with our thoughts, with our emotions, if we support this effort to fight and take down the deep state, our consciousness has a huge amount of power. Whatever people around the world collectively intend happens. That's the power of our consciousness. And not a lot of people know this, but this goes back to the secrets of manifestation and energy and consciousness. So as a planet, our collective awareness does guide the course of the future. So if we can become aware of the truth of what's going on with Trump and the military and the deep state, then it will make their job so much easier, and it will make the chances of victory so much higher. So that's it. Good luck, everybody, and over and out. Talk to you later.